part 2 in our AFL club by club draft plan series. And today we've got Brisbane looking at the prospects they're tied to, the picks they currently have, and the list needs that they need to fill, all coming up. Let's talk Brisbane and their draft plans for this year. Picks 17, 37, 45, 46, 50, 61, 71, tallying 1,531 points. Now, we know that a lot of them are probably going to get swallowed up in an academy bid or two. And pick 17 might not be at their disposal come draft night, just given their plans to make sure they can get Dan Annable in the draft and then potentially look at their other options. So it's been quite the case for them the last few years. Obviously, last year they had to get both Levi Ashcroft and Sam Marshall. Geelong forced a bid on Ty Gallup in pick 42 as well. So that was obviously changed a bit of their draft plans on the second night. And then a couple of years ago, obviously, Will Ashcroft was taken second overall. So could be a very similar case this year. Like we had Dan Annable, second overall in our rankings last week. He probably doesn't get a bid at pick 1, maybe at pick 2, but like we saw with Levi Ashcroft last year, some clubs are just hesitant that early in the draft and are happy to just pick the player they want. But if Dan Annable keeps up his case so far this year, he could be one of the top 3 selected on the night and really force Brisbane's hand quite early. And then, they'll swallow up a heap of their later picks and points. And obviously the AFL's made it a bit harder this year to match those bids, but it's certainly not impossible for the Brisbane Lions given the picks they have at their disposal already.
Yeah, I think Dan Annable, the positive with him, and I think we have talked about it in previous episodes, is I just think he addresses exactly what they need so perfectly. They've got so much star power that's going to be running through that midfield in the next decade or so with the Ashcroft brothers, with Sam Marshall, with Jasper Fletcher as well. And Dan Annable has that ability as well to be that offensive game-breaking match winner, but he's also so defensively accountable that if you did want to insert him into there to ensure that those players are able to run right at stoppage, and then you've got someone playing that James Rowbottom type role. Now, that's probably selling Dan Annable short for how well-rounded his skill set is, but it definitely adds a little bit of grunt into that midfield, which is very, very positive from a Brisbane perspective. When we look at some other list needs from a Brisbane Lions perspective, I think a key defender is something they could be looking at. Obviously, Harris Andrews has anchored that backline for so long, but he's certainly in the later stages of his career, the second half of his career. Then they've also got Jack Payne down there who plays a role. But yeah, in terms of a younger key defender, that might be something they target. There's probably not a wealth of options when it comes to that in this draft class. I think Taj Murray, there's a view from some that he becomes a key defender, but like you said, with where their picks could end up being, he might already be off the board by then, given how strong his form has been so far in 2025. Alongside that, I think that you might also look at a key forward, but that will entirely depend on, well, not entirely depend on, but largely depend on a couple of things, including do they get Oscar Allen? Do they see Logan Morris as a anchor forward, as that sort of spearhead forward, or do they see him as more of that third tall forward? And then how highly do they rate players like Luke Lloyd and Zane Zakostelski, who are both untried at AFL level?
Yeah, they've certainly got some depth options that, like you said, unknown quantities at this point. A couple of the other academy boys and Isaac Waller and Harrison Bridge can offer some help at both ends, but as differing options. Raf Gisu as a more of a small forward, half forward threat for them. So another one that they could look at, life after Charlie Cameron, what does that look like? They've got Kyle Oman. Do they still want to be using Cam Rayner and Zach Bailey deep or higher up the ground as we've seen them do so well this year? So there's certainly some options there for them. I think a ruck is something that they could certainly address. McInerney and Fort both up past the 30 age mark. Henry Smith's looks solid in the VFL and it's got some chances at AFL level, but I think you always want just another name coming through. Obviously, he's also had some injury issues this season so far. So there's pretty much, outside of the midfield, a lot of options that they could look at. And it's going to be quite fascinating with who's on the table when they maybe make that second selection after Dan Annable.
Yeah, there is. And we haven't really narrowed it down, but I think that actually more so speaks to how well-rounded their young brigade is, rather than the fact that they have so many holes to fill. It's really just a final piece. Do you want that extra key defender when you're already so sound in that area? Do you want an extra small forward? Perhaps, you've got Raphael Gisu. They might get to be able to category B list him if he doesn't get a bid matched or doesn't get a bid on him. He's currently out with a hamstring injury. The other three players you mentioned, Annable, Waller and Bridge, are all part of the Allies squad. So yeah, we'll get to sort of see where their stocks are at in a month or so at the end of the championships. But yeah, from my perspective, I would say key defender and potentially, a ruck would be the other one you'd look at. Height is always in hot demand at the AFL draft.
So you mentioned Taj Murray is probably one option for them to look at if they can. Just really depends on draft night, obviously, and where other clubs rate him, and if Brisbane are happy to wait a little bit later, potentially on night 2, and hope he's on the board, or trade a little bit up, could be just outside first round calculations at this point. So if it's Taj Murray's one option, who else would you have as a potential option for the Brisbane Lions at the end of the year?
Yeah, Noah Dore, we touched on him as being a standout from a South Australian perspective. He is certainly one who is coming with a bit of a rush with how his form has looked in the last fortnight. Andrew Barker, Xavier Taylor, Max Condo-Giannis. I guess the thing with those three, though, is they're all sort of undersized defenders, and you're probably looking for more of that 195 centimeter plus who's taking the best forward every week, and I'm not sure if any of those are that sort of player. So yeah, it does become a little bit tricky if you're targeting a key defender in this draft class. It might be a case of who performs at the national championships.
Yeah,
Jackson Barber and Jacob Marin are a couple of others from a Victorian perspective.
Yep. And I think they've got Tom Duday hopefully playing some AFL footy over the next few years to take on that smaller third tall option.
Yeah,
and it's really a eventual replacement for the Paynes and the Andrews.
Yeah.
As you mentioned,